let me say first off that that there are, it seems to become popular in New Mexico for lawyers who are on the other side from the AG's office to allege that we have a conflict of interest. And as I said, one of the things is that for the public that they don't understand is that there are occasionally special rules that apply to attorneys general's offices with regard to conflict. And I think that the lawyers who are out there who are alleging that we have conflict actually understand that. I think that they know that the public doesn't understand that, and that they use that to try and gain some advantage in their criminal trials or in their civil trials. So, and I will tell you that no matter how unfounded we believe the conflict allegations are, that we always do a conflict analysis within our office whenever those allegations are raised. So here's some of the most notable ones. One is the Region 3 Housing Authority. You're all aware of actually two cases that our office has filed against former legislator Smiley Gallegos and multiple other defendants relating to claims that they misused housing authority money. In that case, the lawyers in both of those cases actually raised allegations of conflict, primarily claiming that that our office had civilly represented the SIC, and that because of our civil representation of the SIC in matters that were arguably involve the same fact pattern as the criminal prosecution, that we were foreclosed from prosecuting those criminally. Now, once again, like I said, this is something that only comes up in cases where you have an attorney general's office, because we are one of the only law firms that has civil representation capability and criminal representation capability for one client. In that case, both two district court judges ruled that there were no conflicts and ruled that we could move forward with the trial, but they also allowed those lawyers on what's called an interlocutory appeal to appeal that decision to the New Mexico Court of Appeals. And so those cases were in the New Mexico Court of Appeals for some number of months. People also have criticized our office for not moving these cases along. I'm going to try and give you a flavor for why some of these cases move fairly slowly, but those cases were in the Court of Appeals for some number of months. The Court of Appeals actually then found that there was no reason for us not to proceed with the trial. The defense lawyers then appealed that to the New Mexico Supreme Court. The Supreme Court also fairly recently ruled that there was no reason why we couldn't move forward with those trials. So in both of those trials, there's been no finding of conflict on behalf of the Attorney General's office, and we're moving forward with those trials. But we, once again, in protecting the rights of the defendant, have gone through all of the steps that we have to go through. And I think in future cases, either by myself or by other attorneys general, that the law that's set out by the Court of Appeals and the Supreme Court will be very important in making a determination whether there are conflicts in the future. So I'm not nearly so crabby as some commentators are about how long this takes, because we understand that it needs to be done right the first time, and we're very dedicated to doing this job right the first time. The next case that I think people have been interested in has been the case against Rebecca Vigil-Giron, former Secretary of State, and a number of other defendants, 3 other defendants. In that case, attorneys, there are 4 different defense attorneys. They all raised a number of factual instances that they believed created conflicts of interest. Here is one that is sort of interesting for a couple of reasons. One is, well, factually, let me just say that those motions, the conflict of interest motions, were filed by the defense attorneys very nearly 2 years ago now, about a little more than a year and a half ago. The judge in those cases did not set those motions for hearing right away, and as a matter of fact, you all will know from your reporting that the fact hearings on whether we had a conflict or not were held fairly recently. Now, there's a place where my being an officer of the court doesn't really give me the opportunity to comment on why it took a year or almost a year and a half for the judge to set a hearing on the defendant's motion. But I will certainly tell you that we pretty enthusiastically opposed the defendant's motions. I have a few little backup documents here, and so I have a story from February 13th. I'm trying to see where this is, but it actually is just quotes. It looks like it was in the Albuquerque Journal by Scott Sandlin, but quotes of the Chief Justice, where in this story he talked about the problems that the courts have with budget cuts. And here's this quote. It says, or actually I think this is out of the article, it says, "From the smallest to the biggest, courts statewide are struggling. The judiciary may be an independent branch of government, but it doesn't set its own budget, has no flexibility to move money around to courts where it's most needed, because lawmakers control funding for each judicial district in the higher courts. Quote from the Chief Justice, all the laws on the books are just hollow promises if the courts don't have the resources to enforce them. I will tell you one of the things that might be important to come out of here today is that everybody needs to understand that our court systems are bogging down, and unless the legislature, and I think it's incumbent on citizens of New Mexico to encourage their legislators, unless the legislature adequately funds the courts in this state, that we will continue to have these kinds of problems. In any event, we had a hearing on the issue about whether or not the Attorney General's office had a conflict. This is all information that's in the record, but it's been widely reported that the Attorney General was, I think some of the words that have been used are booted off of the case or removed from the case for various reasons because we had a conflict of interest. I am going to read you something from the transcript of the judge on the day that he handed down his decision. He talks a little bit about each of the factual allegations that were made, but then finally says, in looking at this cluster of conflicts or purported conflicts, I see no wrongdoing on the part of the Office of the Attorney General. I've worked with Mr. Lackman many, many times. That's my attorney that's pursuing this. I find him to be very adept, very talented at trial, very knowledgeable, and quite easy to work with. I don't see the prosecution coming from a vindictive place. I don't see it being created by any political agenda or by any inter-office agenda that would want to come back and punish either Mrs. Kupfer or Ms. Vigil-Giron or any of the other defendants involved. So the factual finding of the court was that there was no conflict by the Attorney General's office, there was no bias, there was no political motivation for pursuing this case. But that gets into what lawyers love to talk about and what we try to do to keep the case on, and I'm going to go on with what he said. He said, but in looking at the issues that are raised, I feel myself in a position where I have to safeguard something much higher than the conflicts I'm seeing here. What I'm tasked with protecting is the integrity of the system. Allegations of government corruption, I think, must be explored in an environment that shines the brightest light on the facts that we can possibly shine. I think the issues that I have just discussed cast shadows on the forum where these issues have to be joined, and I think any time shadows are cast upon this, especially where there are allegations of government corruption, that those shadows have to be removed. And the very clearest light we can find has to be shined on the allegations. One, to achieve justice for the people that are charged, and two, to make sure the community has absolute, complete confidence in what we're doing as a court of law. I think that the judge was expressing what all of us as lawyers work with and struggle with, which is the discussion of what constitutes an appearance of impropriety. Lawyers try and avoid the appearance of impropriety. But I will tell you that as a result of this decision by the judge, I had two choices that I could make. One would be to appeal the judge's decision, basically argue to the appellate courts that there was no finding of conflict and we should move forward. You all, if you look at the time schedule in the Region 3 case, then would understand that that appeal would take me a year or a year and a half. Or I could make a decision to agree that the judge had raised an issue that we should think about and that it was appropriate to decline this case to some other lawyer. And so that's what we decided to do. We decided to decline this case, and you all know by now that we declined this case to the district attorney in the 2nd District. And then now there have been some discussions about how long that's taken or how fast that moves. But here's where being an elected official causes some issues with my being a lawyer. We would have loved to have just gone out and hired a special independent prosecutor and sicked them on the case. When we looked at the law in the state of New Mexico, we found that the Attorney General's office does not have the authority to hire an independent prosecutor. So we'll take that up with the legislature, but we couldn't directly hire a lawyer. So it turns out that the district attorneys do have the authority to hire independent prosecutors, and so we immediately started working with and negotiating with a couple of the district attorneys to see who would be able to manage this case by taking it over and doing that. And you all know, if you've looked at the pleadings in the case, that we have a memorandum of understanding with the 2nd District Attorney's Office. Our office is going to continue to pay the freight because, once again, budget issues have made it such that the 2nd District Attorney's Office can't do this on their own budget. They don't have additional budget to take on a case of this magnitude.